The folded flag fits perfectly in the side pocket of Elena's messenger bag, tucked beneath the volunteer shift schedule she never reads. 12 inches by 8. Precise folds from someone's steady hands. Not hers. She touches it each morning before her shift at St. Michael's Veterans Clinic, 2 blocks north of Savannah Central Subway Station, a ritual nobody at work would understand. A relic from Kandahar. A weight she carries. A promise she keeps. The southbound platform smells like diesel exhaust and wet concrete. Rain hammered the station entrance 15 minutes ago, and the moisture still hangs in the recycled air, mixing with the metallic tang of the third rail and the faint antiseptic from the clinic advertisements plastered across the tiled walls. Elena stands near the turnstiles in her clinic scrubs, the fabric slightly loose at the shoulders, intentionally oversized to mask the muscle definition that comes from 6 years of Army Ranger conditioning. Her discount lunch bags are visible in her messenger bag, tucked beside the flag. Turkey sandwich. Greek yogurt. A thermos of black coffee. The kind of lunch a nurse earning $38,000 a year would carry. The kind of lunch that doesn't belong to Captain Elena Martinez. The 7:34 westbound train pulls into the station, and Lieutenant Cole Martinez steps onto the platform. Elena's eyes track him without lifting her head. The lieutenant wears civilian clothes, dark jeans, a charcoal button-down, nothing that broadcasts his rank or his unit assignment. His 5 feet 11 inches, left-handed, carries a leather portfolio under his arm. Her son's commanding officer. The intelligence asset she's been monitoring for 18 months without his knowledge. The reason her nursing credentials are real but incomplete. The reason her apartment is sparse and her phone is secure and her tactical knife, the one strapped against the inside of her left pant leg, its edge honed to field surgical sharpness, never stays more than 2 feet from her body. The train doors hiss closed. The platform clears. Elena doesn't move. She adjusts the clinic badge hanging around her neck, a small gesture that steadies something inside her chest. The badge photo is 3 years old, back when she had less gray at her temples and wore her dark hair shorter. The name reads, Elena Martinez, RN, St. Michael's Veterans Clinic. The credentials are genuine. The nursing degree took 14 months to complete. The hours spent studying pharmacology and surgical procedure while deep undercover in a medical clinic 2 blocks away, hours when her real training could have been weaponized, that part still tastes like sacrifice. But the badge works. The scrubs work. The discount lunches work. Nobody at St. Michael's knows that the quiet nurse who makes people comfortable during their blood draw spent for years training to extract intelligence from enemy combatants in a war zone. Her hands are steady as she adjusts her badge, but something inside her trembles. Not fear. Not anymore. The trembling is the sound of contradictions trying to occupy the same body. Elena Martinez, RN. Captain Elena Martinez, Army Ranger. 2 identities balanced on a wire, 18 months into an assignment that has no end date. The lieutenant on the platform sees a healthcare worker. The intelligence network that owns her sees an asset. Nobody sees both. The stairs from the Transit Authority office descend in precise angles. Polished steel railings. Fluorescent lights flickering in patterns that would drive a normal person mad. Elena doesn't notice. Normal people notice things like flickering lights. Elena notices things like Dr. Marcus Mercer's shoes hitting the metal stairs at intervals of exactly 2 seconds. She counts them like others count heartbeats. Mercer emerges onto the platform in his pressed uniform, dark blue, gold insignia marking him as Deputy Director of the Transit Authority. His briefcase is leather, expensive, the kind that costs more than Elena's monthly rent. He wears it like an extension of his body, as if the briefcase itself confers authority. His eyes scan the platform with the mechanical precision of someone trained to find problems. He finds Elena. His mouth curves into something that isn't quite a smile. It's the expression predators make when they spot movement in tall grass. Elena feels the weight of his attention land on her like a physical thing, like pressure changing in a room before a storm. She doesn't look at him directly. Instead, she straightens her clinic badge again, a nervous gesture, practiced enough that it feels natural, and shifts her weight to her left leg, a posture that looks uncomfortable but allows her right hand to drop precisely 18 inches from the tactical knife. Mercer descends the remaining stairs slowly. His shoes click against the tiles with the confidence of someone who owns the space beneath his feet. He wears a wedding ring on his left hand, a Rolex watch on his right wrist, and an expression that suggests he's spent considerable time perfecting the art of looking down at people. Elena knows his type. She's met them in 3 countries. They're not the dangerous ones. The dangerous ones don't smile. The dangerous ones don't waste energy on contempt. But Mercer is about to learn that distinction the hard way. He passes within 10 feet of her, close enough that Elena can smell his cologne, something expensive and aggressively scented, the kind that fills elevator cars and makes people unconsciously step back. Close enough to notice her discount lunch bags. Close enough to catalogue her ill-fitting scrubs and her nervous badge adjustment and her inability to maintain eye contact. Close enough to calculate that she is precisely the kind of person he's designed himself to dismiss. "Excuse me," he says, his voice like a tank idling in a garage, heavy, deliberate, impossible to ignore without deliberate effort. "Is that the St. Michael's Clinic uniform?" Elena turns her head slowly. Her eyes meet his for exactly 2 seconds. Her voice, when she speaks, is soft. Deferential. The voice of a woman who has been told her whole life that other people are in charge. "Yes, sir." Long shift? Or early arrival? The question is designed to establish dominance through false intimacy. He's already catalogued her, nurse, probably overqualified for her position, probably grateful for any job that pays her bills. She fits a type he can weaponize. Elena recognizes the framework before he finishes speaking. "Early shift, sir." Mercer nods, his expression not changing. "Well, try not to get in the way of actual security personnel. We wouldn't want any patient confidentiality issues." The implication hangs in the air like the diesel smell, that she doesn't belong here, that her presence is a security breach, that her very existence in his subway station is a problem waiting to be solved. Elena nods, looking down. Her hands rest at her sides. Her right hand is exactly 18 inches from the tactical knife. Her left hand trembles just slightly, a physical tell that Mercer interprets as nervousness rather than what it actually is, the restraint required to prevent her hands from moving on their own. The trembling isn't fear. It's discipline. It's the sound of a captain holding her rank in check because the moment she moves, everything she's built in 18 months of deep cover dissolves like watercolor in rain. "Understood, sir." "Thank you, sir." Mercer walks past her toward the westbound platform, his briefcase swinging slightly as he moves. He doesn't look back. He doesn't need to. In his calculus, she's already processed and filed away. Another nervous healthcare worker, probably living paycheck to paycheck, probably grateful that someone like him maintains the infrastructure that keeps her alive. Elena waits exactly 30 seconds, counting the rhythm of the fluorescent lights. 1 flicker. 2 flickers. 3. The next train arrives at 7:33. Mercer boards the westbound line without looking at the platform again. The doors seal. The air pressure in the station shifts as the train moves through the tunnel. Elena reaches into her messenger bag and touches the folded flag. 12 inches by 8. The weight of Kandahar. The weight of 18 months. The weight of the intelligence network that owns her body and the son whose commanding officer just walked past her without seeing anything but a nervous nurse. She pulls out her lunch bag instead. Turkey sandwich. Black coffee. The life of someone who doesn't exist yet. The woman she's pretending to be until the moment she stops pretending. The morning commuters begin to fill the platform. Nobody pays attention to her. That's the whole point. Elena Martinez, RN, stands alone near the turnstiles with her discount lunch, invisible in plain sight, waiting for the next train that will carry her to St. Michael's Clinic, where she will spend 8 hours drawing blood from Army veterans and maintaining the cover identity that allows her to monitor the intelligence asset on the westbound line. She doesn't know that by tomorrow afternoon, everything will change. She doesn't know that Mercer's contempt will transform into something far more dangerous. She doesn't know that the folded flag in her bag, the only physical connection she maintains to her real rank, her real unit, her real identity, will become the object that destroys everything she's built. But something in her chest knows. Something in the part of her that's trained to read danger recognizes it in the way Mercer looked at her, in the precision of his questions, in the deliberate cruelty of his smile. The fluorescent lights flicker. The platform fills with bodies. Elena adjusts her clinic badge one more time and steps toward the northbound platform, ready to disappear into another day at St. Michael's Veterans Clinic, where the only truth anyone will ever know is the one she's decided to tell them. The briefing room smelled like burnt coffee and fluorescent anxiety. Elena sat in the third row of grey folding chairs at 7 in the morning, her clinic badge clipped to fresh scrubs, watching Dr. Marcus Mercer arrange incident photographs on the projector screen. 20 transit authority staff filled the seats around her, security chiefs, platform supervisors, administrative coordinators. Nobody looked at Elena. They already knew what was coming. Mercer's voice carried the precise cruelty of a man who had spent his entire career weaponizing authority. "This is what untrained personnel look like when they endanger our commuters," he announced, clicking to the first slide. The image appeared, Elena kneeling beside an elderly passenger on the platform, 2 weeks prior. The photo was blurry, taken from 15 feet away, but her face was unmistakable. Her hands were steady in the frame, hovering over the man's shoulder. She had been checking his pulse. That was all. Miss Martinez here seems to think a mail-order nursing certificate qualifies her to loiter near medical emergencies. He pronounced her name like it was a diagnosis nobody wanted. People like her take jobs from real professionals. People like her endanger our entire operation with their enthusiasm. Elena took one measured breath. Her jaw tightened, just barely visible, the kind of clench that only happened when a person had learned long ago that reaction meant weakness. She maintained eye contact with Mercer without blinking, her hands folded on the table in front of her. Her posture remained perfect, shoulders back, spine straight, the kind of stillness that came from someone who had learned to disappear in plain sight. The room shifted. Security Chief Patterson snickered from the back row, his laugh like a hyena testing the strength of its competition. Mercer clicked to the next slide. Another incident. Another blurry photograph of Elena performing her job. Another insinuation. He spent 7 minutes dissecting her presence on the subway platform, framing her observations of commuters as inappropriate loitering, her interventions in minor medical situations as overreach. The words untrained, unqualified, and dangerous cycled through his sentences like a 3-count punch combination. By the time the briefing ended, Elena had become the cautionary tale everyone would repeat in the break room. That was the point. She stood when dismissed, moving toward the door with the same precision she used everywhere, no rush, no hesitation, just the kind of controlled forward momentum that never drew attention. But that wasn't the worst part. The afternoon came hard and bright through the platform's windows. Elena counted coins at the vending machine near the main corridor, deciding between a sandwich she couldn't quite afford and the reheated salad from yesterday that she had wrapped in plastic on her break. Her hands moved through the calculation without conscious thought, muscle memory of poverty, of rationing, of making nothing stretch into something. She had done this calculation in 3 different countries on 2 different continents. She could do it asleep. The machine hummed its mechanical rhythm, a sound like an animal breathing in metal sleep. Mercer arrived with 2 security guards, their presence announced by the particular weight of bodies that weren't there by accident. His face had arranged itself into an expression of manufactured concern, the mask of a man about to perform cruelty while appearing reasonable. "Still bringing charity case lunches, Martinez," he said loud enough for commuters to turn toward the vending machines. Several phones appeared. People always filmed confrontations. Mercer knew this. He was counting on it. Elena's hand tightened on her quarters. She didn't turn around immediately. 3 seconds passed, the kind of pause that made everything after it carry more weight. "Maybe if you spent less time pretending to be qualified and more time learning your place, you'd afford real food," Mercer continued, his voice smooth as oil spilled on water. The guards laughed on cue. Security Chief Patterson had positioned himself near the corridor entrance, blocking any exit that might spare her the performance. Elena turned to face him then. One tear escaped her right eye, not a tremor, not a break, just the physical response of pressure meeting a sealed container. She wiped it away without breaking eye contact, her motion economical and precise. The tear was real. The composure around it was harder. "My place is wherever someone needs help, Dr. Mercer," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, which somehow made it travel farther than his had. "And no paperwork will ever change that." The room went silent. The kind of silence that made the ventilation system audible, the fluorescent lights humming their electric prayer into the air. Mercer's face darkened, not with anger, but with the frustration of a man watching his control slip. His hands flexed at his sides, a small tell, barely visible. "Your place is wherever I say it is," he replied, his voice dropping an octave to compensate for her refusal to escalate. "Next time you forget, security will escort you out permanently." "Make sure she understands," he said to the guards, not looking away from Elena's face. He was searching for something, a flinch, a tremble, any indication that his power had landed. He found nothing but that same flat, composed stare. He turned and walked away. The guards followed, their presence deflating like punctured balloons. Commuters returned to their phones, to their waiting, to their lives. Elena turned back to the vending machine. Her hand still held the quarters. She inserted them slowly, selected the sandwich, and retrieved it from the slot. The mechanical drop sounded impossibly loud in the aftermath of confrontation. She unwrapped one corner of the plastic while walking toward the clinic entrance, eating deliberately, methodically, refusing to appear shaken. That was discipline. That was survival. But by evening shift change, the whispers had already begun their work. Elena moved through the clinic corridors, and the weight of attention pressed against her from all sides, not spoken openly, but threaded through the silence of people who wouldn't meet her eyes. Mercer had spent the afternoon doing what he did best, cultivation. He had told Nurse Chen that Elena bought her credentials online from a website that sold them for $400 each. He had mentioned to Orderly Jackson that she probably shouldn't be handling medications without proper oversight. He had suggested to Dr. Patricia that Elena's intervention on the platform was exactly the kind of liability that turned lawsuits into seven-figure settlements. The insinuations had taken root in the collective imagination like mold in dark water. Two colleagues who usually greeted her with a small nod of hospital recognition walked past without acknowledgement, their eyes fixed on something 3 feet above her head. Another nurse, whose name Elena had learned over 7 months of shared break room moments, suddenly required urgent attention at the opposite end of the hallway whenever Elena approached. The isolation wasn't violent. It was efficient. Elena completed her shift assessment without complaint. She documented vital signs, updated patient charts, responded to call lights with the same measured attentiveness she had shown since arriving at St. Michael's. Her performance was flawless. It also didn't matter. The narrative had shifted. The story being told about her had already rewritten the truth. She was checking the departure time for the express train on her phone, a habit, a pattern, a life lived in increments of transit schedules, when the alert came through. There had been a collapse on the southbound platform during rush hour. A medical emergency. Active. Elena's hand moved toward her bag automatically. The folded flag inside, the one she never explained, never mentioned, kept pressed against her chest like a second heartbeat, seemed to pulse with its own urgency. But she already knew she wouldn't make it in time to assist. Whatever was happening on the tracks was already in progress. The radio in the corner of the clinic crackled with paramedic code she understood better than most nurses ever would. The static between transmissions sounded like the moment before something breaks open, before everything changes, before the world remembers who you actually are. The evening rush hour at Savannah Central Station moved like blood through arterial channels, predictable, pressurized, inevitable. Elena stood on the southbound platform at 5:24 p.m., her scrub still damp from the clinic's afternoon chaos, watching the arrivals board. Lieutenant Cole Martinez was scheduled for the 5:52 inbound from the Army Recruitment Center downtown. 23 minutes of surveillance. A routine part of her 18-month cover, the invisible thread that kept her connected to the intelligence network running through the Veterans Clinic. She'd done this 189 times. Today felt different. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead like they were counting down to something, and the crowd around her, tourists, commuters, a businessman in a charcoal suit checking his watch every 7 seconds, felt denser than usual, the air pressure already changing. The businessman caught her attention because he was moving wrong. His name was David Hartwell, though Elena wouldn't know that until later, wouldn't know he was a pharmaceutical executive with a $847,000 annual salary and a heart condition he'd been ignoring for 6 months because his cardiologist was too aggressive with the meds. He swayed near the edge of Platform 3, briefcase in one hand, the other pressed against his sternum. Elena's medical cortex registered the signs immediately: diaphoresis, pallor, the particular angle of his posture that meant his central nervous system was shutting down. She'd seen this exact pattern in the clinic's ICU ward 17 times. Never got faster at recognizing it. Always got worse at watching it happen. The 5:51 train was arriving. She could feel the air pressure shift as it approached the tunnel, the way the station's acoustics changed when 2,000 tons of steel and electricity curved around the corner. Martinez would be on the 5:52. Hartwell would collapse on the 5:51. The math of timing felt surgical. Elena positioned herself 3 feet from him, close enough to monitor, far enough to avoid drawing attention. Her hands were at her sides, steady as surgical lasers. The flag from Sergeant Rebecca Chen, folded into a triangle, the size of a closed fist, sat in the interior pocket of her clinic jacket. She touched it once, the way soldiers touch talismans before battle. Muscle memory. Superstition. The last thread connecting her to who she actually was. The 5:51 screamed into the station. Doors hissed open. Commuters surged forward. Hartwell took 1 step toward the train. His left leg buckled. The briefcase fell. And then he was gone, not falling gracefully, not the way people fall in movies, but collapsing like a puppet with cut strings, his body hitting the platform edge and rolling sideways into the darkness between the train and the concrete. The crowd froze. Someone screamed. A woman 3 feet away pulled out her phone. Elena's vision narrowed. Everything else vanished except the businessman's crumpled form on the tracks, the 5:51's wheels still rotating, the 43 centimeters of clearance beneath the train car that meant he was still breathing. She was moving before conscious thought could catch up. The turnstile was no barrier, she vaulted it the way she'd vaulted barbed wire fences at Fort Benning, clean and purposeful, her body remembering the geometry of obstacles. Someone shouted. A transit officer reached for her arm. She didn't break stride. The platform edge passed beneath her boots. Then the tracks. Cold rail beneath her palm. The smell of diesel and hot steel and something copper underneath. She descended into the space between the trains like descending into a breach, her body immediately cataloguing the threat. Hartwell was on his back, his eyes open but vacant, his respiration shallow and labored. BP somewhere in the 60s. Oxygen saturation dropping. The train above them was a roof of metal and weight, the darkness punctured by emergency lights that turned everything the color of old blood. No time for protocol. No time for the nurse cover, for the careful deference she'd learned to wear like a second skin. No time for anything except the 3 years she'd spent in trauma medicine with the 75th Ranger Regiment, treating casualties in Kandahar when oxygen was measured in minutes and the choice between procedure and death took exactly 1 breath to decide. Elena's hands moved on their own. Her fingers found the knife, the tactical blade she'd kept hidden in a sheath sewn into the lining of her clinic jacket, for inches of surgical steel with an edge that would cut through anything. She'd carried it for 587 days. Never used it on anything but field rations and zip ties and the occasional stuck seal on a medication bottle. She used it now. Fingers beneath Hartwell's sternum. The knife angled upward at 45 degrees. She felt the ribs resist, then separate. the hiss of air escaping when the blade penetrated the pleural space. She was inside the chest cavity, inside the space where lungs lived and hearts pushed blood through collapsing vessels. Pain was information. Pain was data. She pushed deeper. The crowd above her was screaming. Phones were rising like artillery pieces aimed at the sky, each one capturing the precise moment when Elena Martinez stopped being a nurse and became something the cameras couldn't categorize. She didn't register the flashes. She was in Kandahar, in the FOB med tent, hands bloody to the elbows and moving like this was the only thing in the world that mattered. Because it was. This body on the tracks was the body of every soldier who'd bled out on her watch, everyone she'd saved and everyone she hadn't. The knife wasn't a medical instrument anymore. It was a weapon. A choice. An act of war against the entropy that was dragging David Hartwell toward the dark. She found the pericardium, the membrane around the heart. Opened it. The pressure released like a valve. She could feel the cardiac output improve immediately, could sense the blood beginning to move again, the oxygen beginning to circulate through collapsing vessels. Hartwell's eyes flickered. His body gasped. Not a full breath yet, but a gasp that meant something neural was still home inside his skull. Call 911. Elena's voice came out differently than it had this morning. Lower. Harder. Utterly without the servility that Marcus Mercer had been beating into her for the past 4 months. I need a 14-gauge angiocath. I need TXA. I need a level 1 rapid infuser. The transit officer who'd reached for her arm was already on his radio. His voice was shaking. She could hear him reporting to dispatch with the kind of adrenaline that meant he'd never seen anything like this. Probably hadn't. Most people hadn't. Most people didn't vault turnstiles and open chest cavities in the dark beneath moving trains. Most people didn't have military medicine burned into their muscle memory so thoroughly that their hands could work while their brain was somewhere else entirely, watching the phones rise, watching the videos record, watching the evidence of Captain Elena Martinez, buried 18 months beneath scrubs and deference and a carefully constructed nursing persona, emerge like something bloody and impossible. Hartwell's respirations were stabilizing. The color was coming back to his face. His central line was reperfusing. The pleural space was beginning to drain properly. In the darkness beneath the train, Elena Martinez had performed a procedure that should have killed him, that violated approximately 47 transit authority codes and probably 17 federal regulations, and it had worked. The businessman was going to live. The cameras had captured every second. She didn't lower the knife. She stayed in the thoracic cavity, her hands steady, her breathing controlled, until the paramedics arrived 97 seconds later with their equipment and their training and their absolute certainty that they were walking into a scene from a nightmare. They saw a young woman in blood-soaked scrubs, hands inside a man's chest, eyes the color of a stormy Atlantic, moving with a precision that suggested she'd done this 1,000 times in the dark. The senior paramedic, a man named Clayton with 23 years of experience, took one look at her hands and stepped back. "You're a surgeon," he said. Not a question. Elena didn't answer. She simply guided his hands to take over the thoracotomy, guided the 4 team into position, guided the whole emergency response with the kind of quiet authority that left no room for questions. The nurse's cover was burning away like old paper in fire, but she kept working. She kept her voice level. She kept her composure intact. Just a nurse. Just a trained civilian medical professional helping a stranger on the tracks. The paramedics knew better. They could see it in every movement, the way she controlled the medical instruments, the way she understood the anatomy, the way her hands never shook even slightly. They knew better. And in exactly 41 minutes, when the documentation began, everyone else would know too. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was watching Marcus Mercer descend the platform stairs at 6:18 p.m. with his tablet already open, his administrative eyes already cataloguing the violation, already building the case. He was smiling like a man who'd just been handed a gift. By Wednesday morning, Marcus Mercer had weaponized the incident with surgical precision. Form for 47B lay on his desk, unauthorized medical intervention on transit property, stamped in red. He'd pulled obscure liability clauses from the 1987 Transit Authority Manual, subsection 14.4, the kind of regulations nobody read until they needed a weapon. Mercer had them highlighted. He had printouts. He had timestamps from the security cameras showing Elena vaulting the turnstile at 6:14 p.m., showing her hands moving with a tactical precision that no civilian nurse should possess, showing her face, calm, focused, lethal, as she worked on the businessman's chest. The documentation trail he built was thick enough to bury someone. 3 pages alone detailing unauthorized use of medical equipment on transit property. 2 pages on liability exposure. The Transit Authority could have been sued if something went wrong, and Mercer made sure every administrator understood that Elena's actions had put them at risk. He noted the tactical knife. He noted the absence of identification on what appeared to be a military-grade blade. He noted her composure under pressure, not the nervous composure of a civilian nurse, but the cold operational composure of someone trained for exactly this kind of crisis. By Thursday afternoon, Mercer's complaints reached the clinic administration. Dr. Patricia Santos, the clinic director, called Elena into her office. The folder on her desk was an inch thick. Elena knew what was inside before Santos opened it. She'd watched Mercer construct this case piece by piece over 3 days, each form, each email, each carefully worded summary designed to make her look reckless, dangerous, and fraudulent. "Your nursing credentials are suspended pending investigation," Santos said, not meeting her eyes. "Effective immediately. The Transit Authority has filed formal charges. There will be a federal review of your credentials." "I'm sorry, Elena. I believed in you, but this..." She gestured at the folder as if it contained evidence of something unforgivable. "You used an unauthorized weapon. You violated protocol. You endangered commuters." Elena said nothing. The composure held. The mask stayed in place. But inside her chest, something was cracking, not from fear, but from the realization of what this meant. 18 months. 18 months of building this identity, of embedding herself in the clinic, of positioning herself to monitor Lieutenant Cole Martinez's movements and intelligence feeds through the Veterans Clinic network. 18 months of reports filed carefully to the Pentagon, of classified intelligence flowing through encrypted channels, of a mission that had been building toward something critical in the coming weeks. All of it, gone in 3 days. "When do I finish out my notice?" Elena asked. "You don't," Santos said. "Security will escort you from the building. We'll mail your final check." She opened a drawer and withdrew a severance packet. 30 days' pay as a courtesy. That's all the authority I have. Elena took the envelope. Her termination papers were typed on standard hospital letterhead, her 18-month employment history reduced to 1 page. She'd been erased. The deep cover operative had been cut loose, exposed, left to swing in the wind while the intelligence network she'd been protecting unraveled without her. By Friday morning, Elena descended to the subway station basement where the clinic's laundry service operated. The basement smelled like industrial detergent and wet concrete, the fluorescent tubes overhead casting everything in a sickly white that made her scrubs look like they belonged to a ghost. She carried her clinic uniform in a canvas bag, folded carefully, precisely, the way she'd learned to fold equipment in the Rangers. The way she'd learned to fold flags at military funerals. She placed the scrubs on the folding table. St. Michael's emblem on the pocket. The identity that had taken 18 months to construct, legitimate credentials, clean background, perfect references. All of it destroyed because she'd saved a life and used the wrong training to do it. She smoothed each fold. Her fingers traced the emblem. In her messenger bag on the floor lay the folded flag from Kandahar, the one from her fallen teammate, the one she carried everywhere, the one that nobody at the clinic had ever asked about. Boots on tile. 1, 2, 3, 4. Mercer appeared in the doorway, backlit by the stairwell light, arms crossed like a man savoring a victory. He wore his deputy director's suit, his ID badge displayed prominently, his smile the smile of someone who'd finally caught a fraud. Returning stolen property, Martinez. His voice echoed off the concrete. Elena folded the last shirt without responding. I wanted to see this myself, Mercer continued, stepping closer. The fraud finally caught. I wanted to watch. He was close enough now that she could smell his cologne, something expensive, something that smelled like arrogance and vindication. You know what the best part is? I have documentation. Forged credentials, emergency medical training that doesn't match your file, a knife that shouldn't exist. The federal board will take months just to process everything I've compiled. Elena placed the folded scrubs in her canvas bag. Her movements were methodical, economical, the kind of movement someone makes when they've already accepted the worst. You think you've won, Elena said quietly. I know I have. Mercer stepped even closer. No credentials. No job. No place here. Just like I said. People like you don't belong in professional spaces. You take opportunities from qualified individuals. Real nurses. Real doctors. People who actually earned their positions. He was watching her like he expected her to flinch, to break, to give him the satisfaction of seeing her affected by his words. You can go back to whatever you were before. Whatever charity case operation hired you. Elena shouldered her messenger bag. The flag was heavy inside it, the weight of 18 months bearing down on her shoulders. She walked past Mercer without responding, her movement precise and controlled. The mask stayed in place. The composure held. But her hands were moving into fists and back out again, the trembling that came not from fear but from restraint, the almost unbearable effort of not eliminating this problem with the training that 3 tours in Kandahar had given her. She climbed the stairs to the main platform. The Savannah Central Station was crowded with Friday morning commuters, students heading to Georgia Southern, elderly passengers moving carefully with canes, transit workers in orange vests, the usual flow of humanity that never noticed the woman sitting on a platform bench with termination papers in her lap. Elena found her usual spot, the bench near the third pillar where she could observe the arriving trains, where she could watch for Lieutenant Martinez's daily 7:32 a.m. commute. But the train arrived at 7:32. And it arrived at 8:04. And it arrived at 9:15. And the lieutenant never disembarked. By Sunday evening, Elena understood. The intelligence network had been compromised. The mission was blown. Whoever had been receiving her reports, the Pentagon contact, the CIA liaison, whoever had been sitting behind a desk watching a classified feed showing her movements in real time, they would have cut her loose. Protocol demanded it. Loose operatives created security vulnerabilities. Exposed covers had to be contained. 3 days of sitting on that bench, invisible again, while commuters flowed past like water around a stone. 3 days of watching trains arrive and depart while the weight of 18 months of work sat in her messenger bag beside her. 3 days of being nobody again, no credentials, no job, no identity except the one she'd buried when she became a nurse. Monday morning came grey and cold, the kind of Savannah morning that smelled like rain and diesel fuel. Elena sat on her bench, termination papers in her lap, staring at the departure board without seeing it. Her military phone had been dark since Friday, no messages, no contact protocols, no extraction orders. That meant one of 2 things. Either they were evaluating her operational security for damage, or they decided she was beyond recovery. She didn't notice the wheelchair approaching until it was almost too late. The man in the chair was mid-30s, dark-bearded, with a refugee services badge hanging from a lanyard. He rolled past Elena's bench, then stopped. His entire body went rigid. He turned the wheelchair slowly, deliberately, his eyes fixed on her face with an intensity that made Elena's hand move instinctively toward the tactical knife that was no longer concealed in her waistband. His lips moved. Words in Pashto, spoken quietly but loud enough for the gathering commuters to hear. Reaper 6. The room didn't go silent, it was a public subway platform, crowded and loud, but Elena heard it anyway, that psychological silence that came from your past speaking your true name in public. The man in the wheelchair was a Taliban commander. former Taliban commander. She'd captured him in Kandahar in 2019, interrogated him for intelligence about weapons caches in Sanjan Valley, then arranged his extraction when his family had decided to cooperate with American forces. She'd watched him become a refugee, a patient at St. Michael's Clinic, a man trying to rebuild a life in a country that would never fully trust him. And he'd just identified her by her military call sign in front of 200 witnesses. A Marine in dress blue stepped forward from the crowd. He hadn't been standing there a moment before, which meant he'd been waiting, which meant this was coordinated, and held up a citation document. His voice was clear, precise, the kind of voice trained to carry authority. Captain Elena Martinez, Army Ranger, Silver Star recipient for Valor in Operation Enduring Thunder. Commuters pulled out phones. The word spread like electricity through the crowd. Cameras rose. Mercer shoved through from the ticket booth, his face confused, his tablet forgotten. "What the hell is," he started. 17 confirmed enemy captures, the Marine continued. 3 evacuations under hostile fire. Architect of the Kandahar Medical Intelligence Network. A second Marine appeared beside the first, standing at parade rest. The lieutenant's lieutenant. The backup to the reveal. Because this wasn't an accident. This was a planned operation, and Elena had been the final payload, the asset that nobody knew existed until the moment of maximum impact. "This is absurd," Mercer was saying, pushing closer. "She's a failed nurse who forged." A Pentagon courier emerged from the crowd in a black suit, carrying a briefcase like a talisman of federal authority. He opened it without fanfare and presented sealed orders on heavy cream paper with watermarks that screamed classified. Captain Martinez was assigned deep cover protection of intelligence assets at St. Michael's Clinic, the courier said, loud enough for the cameras to catch. Mission classification, top secret. Lieutenant Cole Martinez descended the stairs in full dress uniform, his face bearing the kind of weight that came from command, from knowing what his commanding officer had actually been doing every day while pretending to dispense flu shots and check blood pressure. "She saved my life in Kandahar," he said, his voice steady and strong. "Carried me for miles under fire while her own shoulder was shattered. She's the most decorated operator in her field." An Army colonel stepped forward, someone important enough that Mercer's face had gone the color of old bone. 2 bronze stars, the colonel announced. 3 purple hearts. Unit classification, JSOC Task Force 121. Codename, Reaper 6. Captain Martinez's suspension is rescinded. Her clearance is restored. She never violated a single protocol. The Transit Authority incident was a classified operation that happened to save a civilian life. Mercer's mouth was moving but nothing was coming out. His hands were shaking. He looked down at his tablet, at the documentation trail he'd so carefully constructed, and Elena watched the exact moment he understood that every piece of it had been either fabricated or irrelevant, that the whole structure he'd built to destroy her had been built on the assumption that she was what he'd accused her of being. 2 FBI agents emerged from the crowd. Their badges caught the morning light. "Dr. Marcus Mercer," one of them said. "You're under arrest for attempted forgery of federal military personnel records and obstruction of classified operations." The handcuffs clicked. Not the rough, aggressive handcuffing of a dangerous suspect. The precise, procedural handcuffing of someone being removed from a crime scene. Mercer walked past the vending machine where he'd mocked her, where he'd stood laughing while security guards watched, where he'd decided that Elena Martinez was exactly what his prejudices had always told him she was. The crowd pressed in with their phones. Someone shouted a question. Nobody answered. Elena stood slowly, folded the termination papers, and placed them back in her messenger bag beside the flag from Kandahar. The basement of Savannah's central subway station smelled like industrial bleach and damp concrete, the kind of smell that gets into your clothes and stays there. Elena descended the stairs with her clinic scrubs folded in a canvas laundry bag, each step echoing off tile walls that had heard 1,000 commute stories but never hers. 18 months of carefully constructed identity, folded into cotton and pressed creases. The fluorescent lights hummed their mechanical rhythm overhead, casting everything in that particular shade of institutional white that made time feel suspended. The laundry service occupied the basement's east corridor, industrial washers and dryers arranged like sentries. Elena approached the drop-off counter with the bag held against her chest. Her hands moved with the precision of someone who had folded field tents in Kandahar, bundled medical supplies under fire, prepared bodies for transport in conditions that never made it into official reports. This was different. This was surrender. She set the bag down. The weight of 18 months compressed into canvas and cotton. She unfolded the scrubs anyway, a small ritual of closure. The fabric had the particular texture of hospital laundering, softened by dozens of cycles until it felt like skin. The name tag caught the light, Elena Martinez, RN, St. Michael's Veterans Clinic. Someone else's name stitched onto someone else's uniform. She'd worn it like a second call sign, answering to it, bending her shoulders to fit it, letting it shrink her down from who she actually was to who they needed her to be. The fold took 3 minutes. Top first, sleeves meeting in the middle with the economy of motion that came from practice. Her fingers pressed the creases sharp, muscle memory from barracks mornings and field deployments, from the kind of precision that kept you alive. One corner of the folded square caught the harsh basement light, and for a moment Elena could see through 18 months of carefully maintained humiliation. The condescending nods from staff who thought she was unqualified. The whispered conversations that stopped when she entered break rooms. The subtle isolation that turned colleagues into audience members to her professional destruction. The clinic scrubs were folded now. Perfectly. Ready to return to inventory, to be issued to the next nurse who would wear them with whatever truth or cover story they carried. Elena placed them in the bag and pressed her palms flat against the canvas. And then Marcus Mercer appeared in the basement doorway. He stood silhouetted against the stairwell light, arms crossed, savoring the moment like it was his favorite meal. His smile carried the particular satisfaction of a man who had systematically dismantled someone he perceived as beneath him and was now watching them acknowledge that dismantling. The basement lighting made his shadow stretch across the floor, a physical manifestation of the authority he'd weaponized. He had spent 3 days building his case, filing documents with surgical precision, Form for 47B for an authorized medical intervention, liability waivers signed by Transit Authority Legal, incident reports that transformed her life-saving action into reckless endangerment. Each paper was a brick in a wall designed specifically for her. "Returning your things, I see," Mercer said. His voice moved through the basement like exhaust through an empty garage, thick, poisonous, occupying space. "Seems appropriate. You never should have been wearing that uniform in the first place." Elena did not look up from the laundry bag. She did not let her jaw clench. She did not let anything show except the simple fact of her hands, steady as surgical lasers, closing the canvas flap. When she finally turned toward him, her face held the particular calm that comes from having already survived the worst the world could offer. "The paperwork is complete," she said. 10 words. Nothing more. She moved past him toward the stairs, and he stepped aside, not out of respect, but because her composure created a vacuum around her that even his arrogance could not fill. She climbed the stairs without looking back. She could hear his breathing change behind her, the small exhalation of a man who had orchestrated victory but somehow felt unsatisfied by the silence of her acceptance. 3 days later, Elena sat on the concrete platform bench where she'd spent 200 mornings before shift, her termination papers folded in her messenger bag alongside the flag from Kandahar. The manila envelope felt heavier than the weight it actually carried: termination notice, final paycheck, paperwork for the credential suspension that would take 18 months to reverse, if she chose to reverse it. The flag felt heavier still. It was a piece of dark fabric, maybe 6 inches square, embroidered with a unit designation, singed along one corner from the blast that killed the soldier who'd carried it. She kept it folded. Never opened it in public. Never explained it to anyone on the clinic staff, though she'd caught Dr. Mercer's eye on it once, dismissed it as the kind of sentimental garbage that people carried because they had no other way to process what they couldn't speak about. The evening rush had thinned to scattered commuters. Tuesday night, the light already falling out of the sky, rain threatening in the distance. Elena sat with the termination papers in her lap and watched the southbound track where she'd saved a stranger's life 72 hours earlier. The field thoracotomy played back in her muscle memory, the moment before action, the breathing that centered everything, the way her body moved from civilian to operator in the space between heartbeats. She'd saved him. And in saving him, she destroyed the carefully constructed identity that made that save possible. A wheelchair rolled past her bench. Elena did not look up immediately. She was calculating distances, threat assessments, exit routes, habits that lived in her nervous system like organs. But something in the wheelchair's approach changed her calculation. The man in the chair was thin, weathered by something beyond age, his left arm ending at the wrist. The face was familiar in a way that mapped onto memory of a specific location, a specific afternoon in 2009, a checkpoint in Kandahar where intelligence indicated a Taliban logistics coordinator would pass through. The wheelchair stopped. The man's eyes met hers, and for a moment the entire subway platform seemed to hold its breath. His mouth formed a word, not English. Pashto. A call sign. A ghost of a name that belonged to someone Elena had buried so deep that only this man could resurrect it. Reaper 6, he whispered in Pashto, loud enough that 3 commuters nearby turned their heads. Loud enough that phones emerged from pockets. Loud enough that the identification that took 18 months to construct, or destroy, happened in a single word spoken in a language most of Savannah had never heard. Elena's face showed nothing. Her breathing remained steady. Her hand stayed flat on the bench. This was the moment, and she recognized it the way soldiers recognize the instant before everything changes. The security of cover existed only in the moment before anyone spoke its name aloud. A man in an army dress uniform stepped forward from the cluster of commuters, LCPL insignia on his collar, familiar face from the clinic, Lieutenant Martinez, her son's commanding officer, the patient whose movements she'd been monitoring across 200 subway mornings. He was holding a leather folio. When he opened it, the citation came out crisp and official, each word carrying weight like ammunition. Captain Elena Martinez, he read, his voice carrying the particular cadence of someone reading official documentation for an audience and for record. Army Ranger, 75th Ranger Regiment. Silver Star recipient for Valor in Operation Enduring Thunder. The sound of phones recording became audible now, that particular soft clicking of multiple cameras capturing the same moment. Rain began falling against the platform's glass walls. Elena watched commuters stop moving. Everything was slowing, compressing, becoming archival in real time. Lieutenant Martinez continued reading. His voice did not waver. 18 confirmed enemy captures in Kandahar Valley. 3 combat evacuation missions under sustained fire. Architectural design of the Kandahar Medical Intelligence Network that coordinated 74 separate operations. The figure of Marcus Mercer appeared at the top of the stairs. He moved through the crowd with the momentum of someone unable to process what he was hearing. His mouth opened and closed around words that couldn't find purchase in the new reality assembling itself on the platform. Fraudulent credentials, he was trying to say something about fraudulent credentials, about an authorized practice, about how this was impossible, about how he had filed the right forms, followed the right procedures, constructed the right paper wall. A Marine colonel in dress blues moved toward the center of the platform, and when she spoke, her voice occupied the space like a physical presence. 17 captured combatants, 19 intelligence assets recruited and maintained, 3 soldiers evacuated who would otherwise have died on that mountain, the colonel said. She was reading from a document now, each line itemized like a manifest. Kandahar Medical Intelligence Network Architecture, Classification Level, Top Secret SCIA Active Operational Value, Ongoing. Mercer was shoving through the crowd now. Fraudulent, I documented, the records, she was. A woman in a dark suit appeared beside Elena. FBI credentials, moved slowly enough that everyone saw them clearly. The agent was not large, but she moved with the terrifying fluid precision of someone accustomed to arrest situations. Behind her came 2 more agents, and the platform's ambient noise shifted into something different, the sound of institutional authority becoming kinetic. Dr. Marcus Mercer, the first agent asked. Not a question. A summons. I don't understand. Her credentials were forged. I followed procedure. Mercer's voice had lost the exhaust-thick quality. Now it sounded thin, reedy, the sound of a man discovering that the paper fortress he'd constructed with such precision had been built on a foundation that was never his to determine. The agent continued. We have documentation that you altered 18 Form CC-14 service records, fabricated witness statements, submitted falsified complaint letters to St. Michael's Clinic administration to justify punitive personnel action against Captain Martinez. That's 18 U.S.C. 1001, making false statements to federal investigators. 18 U.S.C. 1519, destruction of records. Interference with classified military operations. Additional federal charges pending. The handcuffs appeared when he reached for the agent's shoulder, a moment of resistance that the platform recorded from 6 different angles. Mercer's face flushed the particular red of someone discovering that institutional procedures work exactly as designed, and they had been designed against him the moment he decided to weaponize them. His wrists were thin, pale, the wrists of a man who'd never worn calluses or carried weight that mattered. Elena watched him pass the vending machine as they walked him toward the stairs. The machine where he'd stood 72 hours earlier, mocking her charity case lunches while security guards laughed. The machine where he'd proved his complete understanding of how institutions work and his complete blindness to the fact that Captain Elena Martinez operated at scales of complexity that existed beyond his institutional framework. The agent paused beside Elena's bench. Your orders are reinstated, Captain. Direct authorization from the Pentagon. Clearance level, top secret SCI. Your commanding officer will contact you at 0600 tomorrow morning. Elena nodded once. She did not stand. She did not salute. She simply watched as Mercer was escorted up the stairs, his handcuffed wrists catching the fluorescent light, his breathing audible even at distance. By Thursday, his professional license would be suspended. By Friday, the local news would run the subway video with headlines, transit official arrested after targeting decorated Army Ranger. By next month, the federal conviction would carry a sentence of 5 to 15 years, depending on what the military intelligence community decided to declassify for trial purposes. The wheelchair man rolled closer to Elena's bench. In Pashto, he said something that the phones didn't record. Elena understood it anyway. It was gratitude in a language that predated empires, in the particular form of thanks that only someone who'd been captured and then released to a new life could produce. 6 months later, Elena stood in the St. Michael's Veterans Clinic entrance, her captain's uniform pressed and decorated, insignia catching the morning light. The folded flag from Kandahar hung framed in the memorial corridor, alongside photos of her 75th Ranger Regiment team, the ones who didn't come back, the ones who shaped her into whoever she actually was. Lieutenant Martinez appeared on the southbound platform at 0730 exactly, the same time every morning, and he saluted her from across the track, a ritual that had drawn respectful nods from commuters who understood they were witnessing something that lived beyond the normal rules of institutional hierarchy. A medical supply van pulled up to the clinic loading dock. Dr. Marcus Mercer climbed out in company coveralls, his court-mandated community service delivered to the facility that had fired Elena at his urging. He hauled boxes of bedpans and gauze with movements that suggested he understood, finally, the difference between having authority and exercising it correctly. Security Chief Patterson, who once mocked Elena at Mercer's suggestion, held the door open and nodded to her with respect that had nothing to do with rank and everything to do with the simple fact of competence acknowledged. A young nurse asked Elena about her silver star. Elena smiled quietly, touching the tactical knife that still lived in her jacket pocket, the same blade that had saved a stranger's life and destroyed her cover simultaneously. Sometimes the quietest person in the room might be holding it all together, Elena said. She returned to her desk where intelligence reports awaited her analysis. The mission evolved from monitoring to directive, her cover no longer necessary, her identity finally restored to public record. Outside, Mercer loaded the empty cart back into his van, a bureaucratic ghost haunting the station where he'd constructed his paper fortress, now reduced to hauling bedpans past the captain he'd tried to destroy. If you made it this far, you understand what it means to be underestimated. Subscribe for more stories where quiet strength changes everything. Like this video, comment below, Would you have forgiven someone like Marcus Mercer, or walked away? And hit that notification bell because next week we're bringing you something that will make you believe in justice again.